Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on mapping innovation to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. I'm Ninja Laufmann, Senior Product Marketing Manager here at LexisNexis Intellectual Property Solutions. And before we dive in, I will cover a few housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded and you will receive a link to access it later via email. Please use the Q&A box at the bottom to submit any questions during the presentation. We will do our best to answer as many as possible at the end. If you experience any technical issues, let us know in the Q&A box and we'll work to resolve them promptly. And after the webinar concludes, you will be prompted to complete a brief survey where we would very much welcome your feedback. Now, turning to our agenda, we'll dive into some of the topics from the recent WIPO report on patent activity aligned with the SDGs. We'll explain the patent to SDG mapping methodology used and share real-world examples of how organizations are leveraging this mapping to track sustainability progress and inform stakeholders. Today's presenter is William Mansfield, who leads the consulting and customer success in US and EMEA for LexisNexis Intellectual Property Solutions. In his role, he works closely with numerous international Fortune 500 and others to ensure the effective deployment and patent analysis for business strategy, M&A, due diligence, portfolio management, and he has supported clients in successfully setting up tracking and reporting of sustainable technologies, which you will hear more about during this webinar. With that, thank you very much for being here, Will, and I'll hand it over to you.
Cheers, Ninja. Cheers, everyone. Thanks for joining. So, the core topic that we want to talk to today is about the report that has been published. So if we just jump to here, this report is published by WIPO, by the World Intellectual Property Organization, as part of their World IP Day activities. So that was the 26th of April, a few days ago, and the report's been out for a couple of weeks. But whilst published and a lot of input from WIPO, the underlying data and analysis and a lot of body of the text was produced by LexisNexis IP, myself and my colleagues. There was a very strong collaboration with the WIPO team, Chris Harrison there and others. Was I would say, fantastic experience to work with them. They have really strong people on the team there that came up with some great ideas for what you'll find in the report. So the report itself is around the SDGs. I mean, sustainability and the Sustainable Development Goals were the key element of the World IP Day activities. And so this report is a cornerstone of that. And we'll look at the report, and I want to talk to you all about a little bit about the mapping that we have for the SDGs, for the Sustainable Development Goals, what's in the report, and also what people are using this analysis options for in their actual business. But it was a fantastic experience, like I mentioned, to work with them. So firstly, let's just talk about maybe very shortly what the SDGs are and how the mapping actually works. So probably everyone is familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals. These are I would say many years in the making, more than I would say 50 years in the making. They are the latest implementation of the United Nations sustainability efforts, and they were introduced in around 2015. They have a goal date of 2030, so we're somewhere like halfway between the setting and the goal date for these. Most people are aware of the very high level elements of this, the goals themselves, the 17 that are there that are on the screen on the left right now. I mean, these are useful for communication. They're useful for simple understanding and seeing what the intention, high level, is of the specific goals. But the meat and the detail of what the United Nations has set out is a next level or levels down. So within each of the Sustainable Development Goals, within each of the SDGs, there are a series of targets, which is what you see in the middle of the screen. And these are very specific things that the UN sets out to achieve. And they span a huge number of different areas. There are very medical aspects, something like end the epidemic of AIDS, for example, is within there in those words. And there are other elements like access to clean energy, which including things like wind and solar power. So already at that level, they're much more detailed about what specifically should be included. But as part of the targets, there are also indicators. Have we met this target or not? Who should be measuring that? Who should be collecting the data? Which bodies are responsible for this? Also, exactly what data should be collected, how it should be collected, how it should be processed, what the scope of that data collection is. So already there with the targets and the indicator, or the indicators, we have a really, really strong framework for exactly what the UN intends us to achieve with the Sustainable Development Goals in great detail. But going further, there is additional metadata, there is additional definitions and concepts, there's policy guidance and other published documents by the UN. So this framework of the SDGs is not just a very high level definition, but a really detailed framework of we can use to say this is what we mean when we say sustainable. I mean, that is really the tricky point here, to say I as a company am more sustainable, or my R&D efforts are contributing to sustainability more or less than others. We need to have a really robust definition for what we mean when we say sustainability. And LexisNexis IP, we are an authority on patents and patent data, and that is our expertise. We are not an authority on sustainability. So we don't want to take any kind of stand or position on what is or is not sustainable. We are not the body to say this. That's why for us, this mapping, the UN's definition is our primary set. We only include things that the UN specifically mentions within the scope that they specifically outline. And that is a very rigid set for us. Only changes by the UN will influence changes in the way we define sustainability. I mean, this whole thing came from our discussions with organizations in the financial sector looking for sustainable stocks to invest in, or sustainable companies to invest in. And we found that the patents were a good measure of where these companies are investing, where they are developing, what does their future look like? And the Sustainable Development Goals were a great framework to define sustainability. So this is our foundation of what we mean when we say that word. Like I mentioned, we're not an authority on this, we're an authority on IP data. And so where we contribute is then basically translating what the UN has laid out in their framework into patent data. So we take the targets, the indicators, the metadata and such, and we've looked through this to find technologies that are patentable, that we can create patent searches for within the set. And we only include things, like I mentioned, that are specifically mentioned by the UN. And through reviewing the documentation, there are 100 technologies that we've identified, or 100 topics or concepts that we've identified that we've developed searches for. That's how this works. We define the technology which are mentioned, and then for these define searches using title, abstract, claims, description, the classifications of the patent, and such, using multiple different strategies depending on the specifics of what we need to search for. That being said, there are some elements of the SDGs and the targets that are not patentable technology. There are many socio-economic targets within the set here that aren't technologically driven. If we just look at goal 17, for example, partnership for the goals, this is very much collaborating on the effort rather than solving this technologically. And specifically, there are no mapping for SDG 8, 10, 16, and 17. And for some of the SDGs, there are fewer mappings than others, particularly say SDG 1, no poverty. There are some key technologies in there which are mapped, but there is a lot of additional work that needs to be done there that isn't mapped to IP. So this is our process. We have the framework from the UN, the targets, the indicators, the metadata. We identify the technologies. We turn these into searches, translating the UN's framework into patent searches. And then with this, we can look at overall, what are the largest SDGs, what are the most patents, where the most investment is going into, which companies have the most or have the strongest direction, which technologies or regions or filing practices are strongest in this space. So this is the background. This is how we get to this mapping. And so what we want to do then is move on to the report that was published, talk a little bit about what's in there and show a couple of examples. So the next 3 slides, the analysis that you'll see on the right-hand side is all taken from the report directly, and the source noted at the top, and that's available for, you can redirect from the LexisNexis site. You will find it there. You can also find it on the WIPO site directly, and it's available for download if you want to look at it in greater detail. On the right-hand side here, it's just outlining the goals and the number of active patent families that are included in each of these. And you can already see some are much larger than others. And you can also see that 8, 10, 16, and 17 have zeros next to them, as I mentioned. So just to summary briefly what is in the report. So nearly a third of all active patent families worldwide relate to some SDG. This is a huge set, and we'll see later some companies and organizations that are contributing to this and what share of their portfolio is. To assess whether a third is a good number or not is a question. I don't think we would ever expect, or it probably wouldn't be a good target even, to have that be 100% of patent families. There are very important technologies that are not included in the SDGs. So just because something is not included in the SDGs, that's not to say it's unsustainable and should be stopped. These are just the elements that the UN identifies as places which need particular effort, particular work to achieve. Yeah, I mean, the largest activity is SDG 9, which you can see there on the right with the orange triangle. This category in general, this SDG in general, aligns very strongly with patentable, engineering, basically, mostly technologies. And so there is a lot of patents in that space. And I think we all know that the kind of absolute number per se is not the only measure we should be looking at when assessing this. But it's important to see how this plays out, which are the largest. And we can see increasing activity from SDG 13, SDG 7s, climate action, affordable and clean energy, which is obviously great to see. And in the report, you'll see which ones are growing faster, which not, which technologies are growing faster and which not. And clearly there are some where a lot of work has been done, and there are some areas where perhaps more work is needed. Within the report, we look at the trends in the SDGs, different technologies, both from the SDG technology perspective that I just mentioned, but also the WIPO's definition of technologies. We look at the global patent trends and filing activities and strategies around the SDGs, which routes and regions are more leveraged and not. One interesting note that is somewhat an aside from the report per se is for the region and for the owner sections that we will look at in part here, we decided to use only patents that were filed in 2 or more authorities. So patents that are only filed in a single authority were then not included in that set. And towards the back of the report in the appendix, there is an analysis in there showing which regions' patents were then not included in that section and how much. And I think there is, a very interesting outcome there of the shares of regions and which regions are only filing. Well, applicants are really only filing in their own region. And finally, we looked at those regions and broke down by owners, which we'll look at an example of in the slides here as well. And then we broke out academic and research institutions as well. So that's a kind of summary. We've already seen on the right-hand side here the kind of layout of the SDGs high level. But if we dive into one of the analyses that are in the report, here on the right, figure 5 from the report, which looks at the 100 technologies and the SDGs that they form, we can get a picture for what is included and how. So each one of these larger colored bubbles are the Sustainable Development Goals. The bubble size is representative of the number of patents that are in there. And you can see here as well, those 4 SDGs with no mapping are not visible. Within those larger bubbles, the smaller circles with the names are the technologies that we have defined and we've developed searches for. Again, the size of the bubbles representing the number of patent families that they have. So you can see some areas like no poverty down the bottom have very few technologies associated with them. And primarily maybe just one that is driving this. Compared to SDG 9, which has many more technologies associated with it. And we can also see here in SDG 9, greenhouse gas emission reduction, which makes up, a large portion of this SDG. And we can also see it's here in climate action. So this one technology maps to more than one SDG. There are a few cases where that is so. It's also worth noting that these searches are non-exclusive. That means a patent can be both in greenhouse gas emission reduction and, say, sustainable road transport, for example. It's also interesting here to kind of look at the relative size and numerousness of these fields. Certainly within SDG 9, the fields are somewhat more broad. And that is a result of kind of how the SDGs are defined and what they want to achieve. What they want to achieve is a fairly broad outcome. Taking sustainable road transport, for example, there are numerous technologies that could contribute to that. Obviously, within the search, there is a lot of detail about specifically what they are. And that specific detail about which concepts are included and how is also within the documentation for the SDGs that's available in PatentSite as well. Conversely, if we look at SDG 3, there are many smaller technologies. So there are many diseases or health conditions or supporting factors which are mentioned within SDG 3 very specifically. So I mentioned at the beginning, one of the SDGs is end the epidemic of AIDS. So there is a search for any technology that is supporting people suffering from that condition. And there are many similar technologies within SDG 3. This means also that companies investing in medical technologies are very highly aligned to the SDGs. We would see these organizations having much greater shares on average than, say, a company investing in digital technology. So it would be important when we're looking at maybe the owners or the technologies to be comparing like with like. So this is a kind of an overview of the SDGs and what is in them. One other analysis that I would be keen to share from the report itself is this breakdown of the owners. So here, as an example, I've taken the analysis from Japan. This analysis and details around it are in the report for the US, Europe as a whole, China, Japan, and Korea separately. So there are 4 different regions where we do this kind of analysis for, and there is also a trend chart in there. In this context, don't pay too much attention to the coloring that is there. This is to reference between the charts that are in the report. So here we're looking at the top 25 patent owners with headquarters in Japan. By top 25, we're saying those organizations which have the largest SDG relevant patent portfolio out of the owners that we have that have headquarters in Japan. And that number's here in the bubble size. So you can see the varying sizes here, and it's mentioned at the top about the scaling of this. Along the horizontal here is the share of the overall portfolio of this company that is SDG relevant. And on the vertical, this is how quickly the SDG share of this organization is growing over the past 5 years using compound annual growth rates of CAGR. Just picking out a couple of examples, I mean, Unicharm here sticks out far on the right with around 80% of their portfolio being SDG relevant. I mean, this is a very, very high share. I think Unicharm primarily provides kind of somewhat medical supporting consumables and products. And this ends up mapping very strongly to the SDGs. So this is my point about the medical company more likely having closer to 100% relevance. And like I mentioned at the beginning, 100% is maybe not a goal that we want to strive for. There are many technologies that are not included in the SDGs. The SDGs are important. It's important to track and understand and make a conscious decision about. But there are other elements that we should consider as well. So I think striving for 100% is probably not the ideal target. We can also see for Unicharm that their annual growth rate is very slightly above 0. So the growth of the share of their portfolio that is SDG relevant is growing very minorly year on year over the past 5 years. And given that you're already at 80%, that's not really too surprising. I mean, there's only so much further they can go to. So we would expect that share to be low, and that it is above zero at all is, or even a good sign. I mean, we could compare that with Toyota Motor here, which also has a very large share, above 60%. And their compound annual growth rate for the last 5 years of the SDG share is slightly negative, about, just less than 1%. I mean, they have a very, very high share of their portfolio that is SDG relevant already. And that declines a little bit over those years, I would say, is not a terrible thing. They are already in a very good position. I mean, if I was Toyota, I would want to understand what is changing there and why. And we could look into the patents that are, not being mapped to the SDGs and what has increased and why. So that, again, we can make a conscious decision about, is that a good direction? Is that a direction we think is good for our business? On the flip side of this, there is maybe TDK right at the top here, which has a smaller, I wouldn't say small, but smaller share of their portfolio that is SDG relevant, about 25% of their portfolio. But this share is growing over the past 5 years at, more than 10% on average. I mean, that's very strong growth. It obviously stands apart from most of the other players here. And given they have a smaller share to start with, that high growth rate is possible. Likely, there is 1 or 2 technologies that they are investing in that is heavily driving that. We could dive into the details for TDK and look at specifically what those technologies are that are driving it, either through the lens of the SDG technologies or through other means. So this is what is in the report. Just wanted to share with you a couple of examples of what is there. It's super interesting. I would definitely recommend everyone to go and download. I'm sure we will give a link after the session if you've not found it already, to look at it in more detail. There's a lot more analysis in there, both in the charts and in the text. And even if you just flip through and look at the charts, it's super interesting. Definitely recommend you take a look. But whilst this is of interest to understand globally what is the trend and which companies are maybe the leaders in some way of this trend, there is always the question of what can I do for my business to actually use the SDGs and support my organization. And so we wanted to spend a couple of minutes to talk about what some organizations are doing in order to do exactly that, support their own organizations' movement towards sustainability. So here are a few extracts of some organizations' sustainability reports that are using patent site data today to talk about the SDGs and their sustainability activities. This is just a subset. There are many that have done this, and even more that we have had conversations with and use these KPIs internally. But 2 that I am more aware of and are specifically detailed in their sustainability reports are Siemens and Merck here in the top left. And so what I wanted to do is just dive into those a little bit and look at the measures that they are choosing to use for their sustainability tracking. So in order to do this, I would like to just jump into patent site. so that we can look at this live, and there will be examples of this in the slides that will be shared afterwards as well. So many of you might know this is the patent site interface already, and we'll jump into the custom analysis in order to see this directly, what these organizations are doing. So that is here. And to start with, we can just take the overall Siemens portfolio and search for this, and then we'd drill down into the SDGs. We could, normally jumping to the kind of radar chart here to show us which SDGs are most used by or most supported by Siemens. So this is a version of that analysis. So we have Siemens in the filter. In the pie chart, this is the share of their active portfolio that is SDG relevant. So we can see the yes on the right, the 47% of their active portfolio as of the end of 2023 is SDG relevant, and 53% is not. This is the number that Siemens chose to put in their sustainability report. This 47% of their portfolio for the year 2023 is SDG relevant. So this is how we can simply find this number. And we can also see, how this breaks down. So here we have the kind of portion that is not mapped to any SDG. So the 53% here in this gray portion is the same 53% that you see on the left. And then this is broken down by the other SDGs as well in the right-hand graphic. As I mentioned, there can be overlaps. Some technologies are in multiple SDGs. Patents can contribute to multiple technologies. So we would expect some overlap. So if someone wants to break out the calculator and add up the percentages here, I guess it will be more than 100% on the right-hand chart. But we can point to some areas where Siemens has contributed to the most, particularly good health and well-being. It's not too surprising, and also in the industry, innovation and infrastructure. And for these, we could drill down into the specific technologies that are relevant for these. We can also see a few more minor contributing areas. Minor is maybe a strong word. Lesser, there is still a huge number of patents and a lot of innovation that goes into these areas, even though they are only, say, in this example for SDG 7% of the Siemens portfolio. There are also a couple of areas that have very small percentages, 1 or maybe here rounding to 0. The SDGs are built from patent searches. As I mentioned, title, abstract claims, descriptions, some classifications and such, and we use different strategies in order to capture different elements. Now, if we have a very specific technology, it is, as I'm sure many of you know, much simpler to isolate the patents that are relevant. But if the goal or the target is talking about an application of that technology, so there is one which is, for example, waterborne diseases, we need to broaden our search to include diseases that can be waterborne and treating them in that way, that specific application. And so in that way, we need to be broader. And it is natural with any kind of patent search that we are going to have some noise in the result. I do not expect it to be 100% perfect. Within our review, we aimed for all of these to be 80–90% accurate, somewhere between that range, which I think is typical for patent searches. And we constantly review and monitor and track improvements that we might need to make in minor ways to ensure that our searches are as good as possible. But there will always be some element of noise there. And I would assume maybe some of the the very low percentages here are this. And that comes with the territory. It will never be perfect. As I mentioned at the beginning, a third of all patents are relevant, and so we are not reviewing these one family at a time. So that is what Siemens have chosen to use to publish as part of their sustainability report. I think the share is an important metric. You've seen that it's part of what we've included in the WIPO report as well. So I think it is really important. However, it is not something that will change very much year on year. I mean, yes, 1 year to the next, some patents have become inactive. You've discontinued some. You filed and you've had published some more. But the turnover of the portfolio is maybe 10%. And so we can only really envision that number will change at most by such a percentage. So the change year on year is going to be quite slow. The bulk of the set is actually going to be the same. That's not a bad thing. These are the technologies that Siemens is utilizing. They're choosing to maintain them. They're the ones that they are actualizing in their products or their services or such, most likely. So it is a meaningful indicator, but it doesn't change too much year on year. If we wanted to measure something slightly different, maybe the ongoing R&D activity for the past couple of years, I mean, this is what Merck chose to look at. So we have the same analysis here on the right-hand side, but what we're looking at in terms of the result set is different. So Merck said that they wanted to, and this is what they say in their sustainability report, patents that are published in the year. So for their report for 2023, they state that 29% of the patents that were published in 2023 were SDG relevant. And so on the right-hand side here in the filter, I have not just Siemens, not just the owner, but Merck switched now, and a publication date filter for 2023 from the 1st of January to the end of year. And this 29% here, the green section, as with Siemens that we talked about already, is the number that they quote in their sustainability report. And this is going to be much more dynamic year on year. I mean, yes, it's not the R&D activity from just the previous year, right? We're not talking about what was filed in the year, because of course, with publications, the delays and that being a variable amount of time, capturing everything that was applied for in a year is tricky at the point in time that they would need to fill out their sustainability report. So we're looking at published, which then has a slightly longer time frame in terms of R&D activity, in terms of filing activity, but is very dynamic, potentially year on year, and actively reflecting what Merck is choosing to pursue in terms of ongoing R&D activity and filing activity, rather than what they're choosing to maintain as their portfolio, which is maybe what they're commercializing on an ongoing basis. And I think this distinction is really important. Understanding what it is that you want to measure. I mean, here you have with the Merck publication year definition, you can affect change rapidly, actually. You can make changes to your process for this year and see that reflected in just the next couple of years. And it's really measuring the ongoing R&D rather than the portfolio. And so what you want to communicate, what you want to KPI as well, how you want your business to change and adapt towards sustainability, these decisions are important. What we measure is important because it will influence different behaviors within organizations. And then similarly on the right, the 71%, and the areas which Merck is contributing to. We can see, the same basically 3 and 9, and much less of the other areas. So, I mean, this is what some organizations are actually doing to implement the measures as their KPIs, as their processes. There's many others that are doing something like this. As I mentioned in the slides, and you'll find what it is that they choose to present in their sustainability reports. What I just showed you as numbers for these two organizations is exactly what they place in those reports. On the following slides, which will be in the handout, the specific details of how they choose to communicate that in those reports are there as well. So, I mean, that is a kind of summary of the WIPO report, the SDG mapping, how some organizations are choosing to implement and report, track and drive their business towards sustainability. And so, as we move on in the session here, I just want to make a few other notes before we maybe take some questions or answer some questions from the round. So one thing I do want to mention is on June 5th, in Germany, near Frankfurt in Wiesbaden, we have the Patent Site Summit for the year. We're really looking forward to this event. We have a great location for this. And like I say, it's just outside of Frankfurt. That's somewhere we've moved this event to really allow, better connections transport-wise, so that people can arrive there. When we've had this in Bonn, where we are, in previous years, it's more tricky for people to arrive, so we wanted to change that. And we're really lucky to have Chris from WIPO actually present on the report as well, and a few other items that he and some collaborators have been working on. Super interesting stuff. I'm really excited to listen to that. He's one of the many great speakers that we have for this. Yeah. So just want to mention it there, that there will be more information in this session, and it is physically on site at this location in Wiesbaden on June 5th. Then, Nina, shall we talk to some questions that are coming in? I see there are some.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. So first of all, thank you very much for providing us with these insights and explanations and the examples you showed in Patent Site as well. It's very helpful, I think. And yes, actually, there were a couple of questions coming in through the Q&A box, and they are still flowing in. So I'll pick some of them which came out earlier before. So thank you very much for this. And if you have questions in mind, feel free to still drop them in. Well, there were a couple of questions about the mapping. The first one is, if you've said you've mapped all patents, what is the basis for this? Does the search include granted patents or also applications? And what about utility models?
Sure. So the searches, like I mentioned, they're combinations of full text and classifications together or independently. This is documented for each of the searches. That's available in Patent Site as well. There's a PDF for each that you can look at to explain the concepts that are behind all of this, if you're interested. And those searches run across our full database. So they run across all of the patents that we have access to, including, as much as possible, any utility models or others. I mean, there are some things within our database that are, say, design patents as well, which, given the search strategies and the contents of those patents, I would be surprised if any are captured, because they are drawing based and such, and the text is not, there isn't much there isn't much classification to it either, so I would be surprised if any of those are captured for example, because of their nature, but we don't actively exclude any type of IP right other than what we have in our database. The searches are family based, so they are looking at the full documented scope of the patent filings. This includes not just the grant, but the application and any other material in there. So they are the broadest set possible. Of course, we can filter any of this. We could filter down to, as we did with the report, you know, only patents that are internationalized, for example. We could look at only patents that are granted. We could in or exclude the utility models as much as they are captured or the other IP rights. So the searches themselves are run across everything, but the users have the option to filter this down should they choose to only look at some subset of this.
And then related to that, did you use patent classification for each to identify the relevant terms for each search string, or did it also include keyword searches in the searches?
Yeah, like I mentioned, there are different strategies in there. I mean, some technologies we can leverage, you know, almost just classifications to return, right? If we think about some of the medical technologies, some of those are very well aligned to the classification systems of IPC and CPC, and we can heavily rely on these. I don't believe that any search only uses classifications. I think every search uses both to some degree, some full text search and some classification-based search. But depending on the technology, if it's very specific, if it's an application, if it's very well aligned with the classifications or completely unaligned to them, we've used multiple different strategies to come to this set. We have some internal experts that in different areas who we've used to, you know, define what those searches are. We discussed with some third parties on the development of the searches to get additional input on what should be included. As I mentioned, we adhere as closely as possible to the definition of these concepts as the UN defines it. And, you know, over the first iteration of these searches, we had many conversations with stakeholders. That includes some of the organizations that I've shown on the slides previously, some other organizations who were interested, people like Chris, for example, in his previous role at the UK Patent Office as well. We've had conversations with about this. And certainly the first version of these searches, we made a number of updates based on that scope of feedback to make sure that we're considering everything we should, but we're also rigidly sticking to the UN definition as it is.
Yeah, and actually there is a slightly related question to that. So how do you process terms that describe a sustainable innovation but are not mentioned in the UN framework?
Yeah, I mean, if anyone looks at the analysis, looks at the report, looks at the data in patent site and feels there is a concept that we in or exclude and feel that is part of the UN's targets and indicators and is well represented there, then I would be extremely happy to know from you. And we have had a lot of those conversations in the past, but much less so more recently, as you know, the definitions have matured from their initial inception. And so those conversations normally go one of two ways. They're either, okay, yes, you're right, we've forgotten some concept, we should add that concept, or no, that concept is not part of the UN definition. So maybe a couple of examples of that. One example of the no would be alternative meats. So meat products not made from, traditional cattle rearing or such processes. I think there is a lot of push for this to be added to the UN's definition of the SDGs. It is not mentioned in some way, even tangentially to the UN SDGs today, so it is not included. Sure, you can make a really strong case that it should be, but we will leave it to the UN to decide, and if they choose to change the SDGs to reflect that, we will change our mapping as well to include it. Another example of the other side of that conversation would be a discussion we had on something that was called smart windows, which is kind of like, the only time I've really seen these in reality is in an aeroplane where you have these electrically dimmed window panes. And obviously they're produced in much greater sizes and implementations than this. And the feeling was this should be included. And when we looked at this and reflected on it, we realized that the problem that these are solving for is kind of the thermal management of buildings, like not automatically controlling the amount of light and heat that is getting into the building from the outside, and managing that better so that you need to use less heating or cooling infrastructure, less resources to do this. And this is something that is definitely defined within the SDGs, and in our very original inception of the search is something that we missed. And so we did not say, okay, we should just include that technology holistically, this smart windows, but we looked for the application, this kind of better thermal management of buildings, and included this inside one of the searches in order to better capture this. And I'd be more than happy to have such a conversation about any specific concept with anyone who is interested, customer or not.
That's great. Are these the underlying searches are the underlying searches for the SDG mapping documented and available for viewing?
Yeah. The detailed searches themselves are not available. We have not made these available. But we do want to allow you to really understand what is included. And so there is documentation which includes extracts of the searches to exemplify the concepts that we've intended to include in the searches. This does include some of the strategies around how we have searched, how we've combined keywords together, but it's not extensive. It doesn't include every variation of a particular name or concept that we've used in the search, but it includes examples of these so you can understand, we've intended to include this concept, and this is how we've intended to include it. We've chosen to do this in this way, honestly speaking, because I think we could get, two experts in a topic, sit them down, define searches, and they would argue all day about the nuance of the specifics of the search. And we're very happy to have a discussion about the concepts that we've intended to include, and in principle, how we've intended to include them. But I believe having a detailed discussion on the very specific wording is, an unwinnable argument. Different experts will have different opinions on this, and so we've made the decision to basically not share it in that level of detail, because we believe that is not a discussion that is worth having. But we do want to allow you to fully understand what is intended to be included.
Okay, and then one more for this topic. Is it possible to sub-slice the SDG goals to more detail to SDG targets? See your slide 9.
Yeah, we don't let you slice into the targets, which would be great. I fully agree with that. But there are some goals and some technologies that are, affect the technologies map to multiple targets, or maybe they map to a large part of the goal. And so there isn't a mapping that we managed to achieve that was target to technology. The targets greatly influence the technologies that we've defined. But the mapping we have is technologies to goals. So this means you can't drill into the targets. You can drill into the technologies. So there are these 100 technologies that I showed in the kind of nested bubble chart. You can drill into this level, and you can drill in further as well using, classifications or other concepts in order to slice this. But there isn't a mapping that we've been able to achieve only to the target level. Yeah, it's unfortunate, but I think it's tricky. A lot of work went into making the mapping as we have today, and I think it would, in order to slice it, would be, still a lot more work. And whilst very interesting, something that we've not done so far.
Okay. And then maybe just one last question I pick, which is like slightly going into a different direction, and probably worth having another discussion about it, but probably you can also answer that very briefly. So you mentioned the motivation of creating the sustainability goals mapping was partially motivated by financial analysts looking for ESG stocks. And do you know their train of thought on how to use such a mapping in their stock picking decisions?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an interesting thing that I'd happily talk to anyone about. But I mean, that started with a discussion on how patents could support investment decisions. And that discussion quickly went on to be, okay, we could use patents to say these are the companies investing in such a technology, autonomous driving or solar, whatever that technology is, to be able to identify groups of companies that could be clustered together to form sets of investment. So if someone comes to these organizations and say, I want to invest in autonomous driving companies, they have a set of companies that they can say, we can, invest in this set, and we've defined this looking at their R&D through the lens of patents. And then we went on to the discussion of, okay, which kind of technologies would be interesting, and they mentioned this challenge with sustainability and people wanting to invest in sustainable organizations. And so we found that using patents, using the Sustainable Development Goals was a good vehicle in order to be able to set that group. So it is purely, I want to invest in this topic. Which organizations should I select? Basically, as simple as that. I realize there are many more layers that could go into that, right? That you could have this as a separate layer. You could even introduce it as a kind of risk calculation. If someone is so sustainable or so not, what is the associated risk of that investment? There are many more options and many more complexities than that simple use case. But like I say, would be happy to talk with anyone about that if they would be interested.
Great. And yeah, there are a few more questions in the chat, but as we are nearing the hour, I will close the Q&A now. But if you've had raised any questions in the chat, which are still open, please indicate in the survey if you would like us to continue the conversation offline. And here's one last slide that when following up, when you receive the follow-up email in a couple of hours, you will get access to that link here as well. So if you would like to access some additional resources around sustainable innovation, we have created this Sustainable Innovation Hub on our webpage where you can access much more resources and insightful information. So yeah, feel free to go there and have a look. And with that, thank you very much, Will, for presenting, and thank you everyone for attending today's session, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.